Hello and welcome back. In this video, let's build out our client script for the game. So we'll start by importing some modules. So we'll import Pygame. We'll need it here on the client side as this is what we'll actually use to play the game. And then for all of our networking needs, we'll need socket, we'll need threading, and we'll need JSON. So it's very similar to what we had over here, except we just got to add Pygame and we don't need time anymore. And so now what we're going to do is, just like before, let's start by importing some, or not importing, let's start by setting some constants that we can change. So I'm going to put just a little break here as visual cue that this is the region that people should be messing with. And we'll say define socket constants to be used and altered. So I'm going to put, I'll put a little comment here. Destination IP should be of the form and 192.168.1. Star or other addresses. So you got to put them in as a string here. So we're not going to actually do that though. We're going to do destination, for right now at least, IP as socket.getHostByName and then socket.get host name, because we're running this locally just for testing on the same machine. But if you wanted to, try this out and put it on different computers, you got to actually write the IP out like this as a string. All right, and then let's do destination port. We're not going to change our port address for right now. We'll just keep it at 12345. And so really, that's all that the client should be messing with. The client should be messing with anything else here on their end. All right, wonderful. So now let's add a section to define some classes. We'll blueprint these out. So we'll say define classes. And let's talk about the classes that we're going to need here on our client side. So the first thing that we're going to need is we're going to need our connection class. So class connection. And we'll say a socket connection class for players to connect to a server. And we'll just initialize it. So def underscore underscore init underscore underscore and take in the required self parameter. That's all we need. Initialization for the connection class. And we'll pass. All right, that looks great. So next, we are also going to need a player class. So we had a player class on the server side. That's going to set the player up for us. We're going to build the player over here on the server, and then we'll send it over to the client. And so we'll have a class to grab all that information and store it. So we'll say class player. A player class the client can control. All right, and so this is what we're going to use to essentially move around our game window, play the game, all that good stuff. So let's take in let's write our initialization. So def underscore underscore init underscore underscore. We'll take in our self parameter, and we're going to need our connection object here. So def we'll need our connection, and the reason why is the player has to connect to the server to receive all of the information about its setup. So we need that connection object. So we'll put here initialization of the player class, and we'll write pass. All right, next, the player on this end is going to have to set their player information, right? We're going to receive information from the server, might have some information about updating our player. We should be able to set that information here. So we'll say def set player info, and we'll take in the self parameter, and we'll take in some player information, probably like a dictionary with updates about the player's coordinates and status flags. So set the player player info to the given information from the server, and we'll say pass for right now. All right, next, the player should have an update method, and the update method will get called probably every iteration of our game loop, and it's in here we'll have our controls for moving the player. So we'll say def update, and that's just going to be the self parameter, and we'll say update the player by changing their coordinates in the game. So essentially, that's a fancy way of saying moving the player. And we'll just put pass here. And then I think the last thing we'll have to do on the player class here is we're going to have a reset method. Just like we did on the client side, we're going to reset some stuff on the client. Or on the server. We should also reset some stuff over here on the client anytime a new round starts. So we'll say reset player. We'll pass in the self parameter, and we'll just say reset player values for a new round on the client side. And we'll pass for right now. Awesome. So the player class, I think, is blueprinted out nicely. And so next we'll have a game class over here on the client side that's going to handle all gameplay operations. So we'll say class game, a game class to handle all operations of gameplay. Perfect. That sounds great. And now let's initialize it. So def underscore underscore init underscore underscore, and let's think about what the game class needs to function upon initialization. So we got to pass in self. That's a given. We will need our connection object so we can communicate to the server, so connection. We will need the player object that we've just created. We'll create a player object and we'll pass it into the game, so we'll need a player object. And then I think we're also going to need the total number of players that the server is going to allow. So we'll say total players. And that's some information that when the client connects to the server will send that information over to us. All right, and so we'll just, for right now, we'll just say initialization of the game class, and we'll pass for right now. All right, wonderful. Next, the game should have a ready game method. It's going to need to, we said the server is going to be looking for some confirmation that the player is ready, and so we've got to have a method that's going to do that on our end. So we'll say def ready game. We don't need anything in here other than just ourselves. So we'll say ready the game to be played, and we'll pass. We should have a start game method. So we'll say def start game. All right. Start the game. That one's pretty easy, I think, as a doc string. We'll pass. And then we also should probably have a reset game. So these are going to be like our three helper methods that kind of get the game into the correct state, whether or not we're waiting, we're playing, or it's ended. So we'll say def reset game, and that's an easy doc string. Reset the game, and we'll pass. Okay, so now what we'll need to do is we're going to have some methods to send and receive specific information to and from the server, right? We got to be able to communicate with that server, and we'll do it through our game object. So first we'll have a function send player info, and we'll just take the self parameter. We'll build up some information to send specific to our player over to the server here. So we'll say send specific info about this player, about this player to the server. All right, and we'll pass. We're going to have to be able to receive some player information. So we'll say def RECIEVE. It helps if I spell it like that. And we'll take in our self parameter. So we'll say receive player info, and this is going to receive specific info about this player from the server. So remember, the player is going to update on the client side. We're going to send that information over to the server. The server is going to process it and send it back to us, and then we're going to have to receive that information. Perfect. So we'll just say pass right here for right now. Now, if you notice here, over on the server, in the game class on the server, I think we had a receive pre-game player info, and we had receive game player info. So we were really separating this idea that before the game starts, we are going to be, treating things differently than while the game is being played. And so we're going to do something similar, I think, over here on our client side. So we're going to have a method called receive pre-game state. So we're going to get game states from the server, and we are going to specifically look on the client side for a pre-game state. So we'll say receive pre-game state, and we'll say receive all information about all players from the server before the game starts. So maybe whether or not every single player has hit a button to indicate that they are ready to play. Then, once the game starts, we're going to need to get a different type of game state from the server. So we'll have a def receive game state. All right, we'll take in the self parameter, and here we'll say receive all information about all players from the server during the game. And we'll say pass. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Now what we're going to do is if we're going to receive a game state from the server on our end, we should probably like process that game state so we can make appropriate changes on each individual client. So we'll say def process game state. And this will be process the game state to update scores, winning player, and time, etc., etc., etc. So those are the types of things that we have to update when we process an individual game state. Who's currently winning? What are the scores? How much time's left in the round? So we'll pass for right now. Oh, I forgot one. There we go. So we'll pass right now. And then the last stuff we need here is we'll need some Pygame specific functions to help us out running Pygame, such as the update function and the draw function. So we'll say def update, and the update will just take in itself and say update the game. We'll pass for right here. And then we'll do def draw self. And we'll say draw the game and all game assets to the window. And we'll pass for right now. Whew, all right, so this looks pretty good. We've got the game class is complete, our player class looks good, our connection class looks good. This is a nice setup. I'm going to push forward here, and let's actually go ahead and get Pygame set up. So the first thing that I'm going to do outside of all of my class definitions is we'll start by, we'll create a connection object. We know we're going to need one, so we'll say create a connection, and eventually we'll say and get game window information from the server. So we'll say my connection is equal to a connection object. So now we have a connection object. And eventually what we're going to do, our server, whoever is running the server, will dictate how big a room size is, how big our player size should be, what our FPS is, how long a round should be. And the first thing that they're going to do when someone connects is they're going to send that information over to the client. Now, that's why we're making our connection object, so then we can grab all of that information. We're not going to grab it now, though, because none of this functionality works. So what we'll do is we'll just hard code some constants, but eventually we'll set it up to get a lot of this information from the server. So we'll say initialize Pygame. We got to initialize Pygame before we can use it, so pygame.init. All right, now that's set up. So let's set some game constants. So we'll say set game constants here. And again, we're going to hard code these. So window width is equal to, I don't know, we'll just say 700. Window height is 700. We want a square room. We'll say round time is equal to, I don't know, 60 for right now. Let's set some colors. So I'll do black is, and as a tuple, black is 0, 0, 0. We'll do white. That is 255, 255, 255. It's full on in red, green, and blue channels. And then I'll do magenta. And I'll do a magenta as 155, 0, and 155. So, you know, a little bit of red and a little bit of blue with no green. Next, we'll set an FPS. So we'll say frames per second is, well, we'll just pick 30. And again, a lot of this information we're going to change because eventually we'll get it from the server. Let's also make a clock. So that'll help us set a maximum, game speed. So we'll say clock is pygame.time.clock, a clock object. And remember, it's these two things that are going to ensure how fast I think our game runs on any computer. So if we have a frames per second of 30, it means our main game loop will not be able to run faster than 30 frames per second. That doesn't mean it's going to run at 30 frames per second, because depending on your computer, it might run slower than that. But if you have like a really fast computer, it will ensure that it's not going to go faster than 30. Okay, and let's actually create a font object while we're here that we can use to render some text to the screen. So we'll say font is pygame.font, and I'll use a system font, so sysfont, and this is something that should be available on all computers, and we'll use Gabriola, size 28. All right, so with our constants defined, let's now go create a game window. So we'll create a game window, and to do that we'll call our game window, I think we were calling it display underscore surface. It's a display surface, and we'll use pygame.display.set underscore mode. That will create our window for us, and in here we have to pass a tuple, the dimensions of the window. Well, we have our window underscore width and window underscore height, constant variables that'll help us out with that. Let's set a caption for this. So we'll say pygame.display.set_caption. And in here, we'll pass in the name of this game, which I have named squiggly line, color collide. Squiggly line. Because that's essentially what's going to happen in this game. We're going to have a bunch of colored squares that are trying to collide with one another. All right, perfect. Now, what we'll do is we're going to create a player object. We've got the outline for it already made. So we'll say create player and game objects. So we'll say my player is equal to a player object. What does a player object need on initialization? It needs a connection, which we already have. We made one, the my connection. And then let's look at what does the game need. A game needs a connection and a player and then total players. So keep that in mind. If we scroll down here, we'll pass in our my connection. All right, connection object. And then let's make a game. So we'll say my game is equal to a game object. We said we need a connection, so that's my connection. We need a player, that's my player, and then we need a total number of players. Eventually we will get this from the server, but for right now I will just hard code it in as 4. All right, so that setup is pretty much done, which means we can now run the main game loop. All right, so inside of the main game loop, we'll use an active variable to control the loop. So we'll say running is equal to true, and then we'll say while running, what do we want to do? Well, the first thing we'll do is we'll check to see if the user wants to quit. So check to see if the user wants to quit. And to do that, we have that event queue. So we'll say for event in pygame.event.get. So this is going to get all of the current events that are in the queue and empty them into a list, and then we can loop through that list. And we'll say if event.type is equal to pygame.quit. So if it is a quit event, meaning the user has pressed the X button, that will indicate that it is a quit event. What do we want to do? We'll set our Boolean running to false. So it should close out the window for us. All right, so that's the first thing we definitely want to do. Now what we'll do is we'll start by filling our display surface in black. So we'll say here, fill the surface. So display underscore surface dot fill will make it our black color that we had defined. So we'll always start, before we do any drawing, we'll start with a blank black canvas, and then we'll draw on top of that. So to draw on top of it, we'll update and draw our classes. So we'll say my player.update. We'll update our player. Update. We'll update our game, my game.update, and then we'll draw my game. So my game.draw. And so if you notice, I don't have a draw method for the player because I just draw the player inside of the game because it's an asset of the game. That's how I like to do it. So that will ensure that we're starting with a black surface and then we're drawing everything on top of that black surface. If we had reversed it, what we would do is we would draw everything and then just draw a black surface on top of everything, which would be pretty bad. Last thing that we need to do here inside of our main game loop is we'll update the display and tick the clock. So all of these changes that we've made to the display, we have to actually push them forward, and to do that we call pygame.display.update. And then lastly, we will tick our clock. So if you remember, we made a clock object here, clock, and a frames per second variable, and we said that this will ensure the maximum speed with which a game will run. And so we'll come down here and we'll just say clock.tick, and we'll pass in our FPS variable. Okay, so if we run this now, we'll just run the client. Our game window should hopefully open up and we have no errors. Magenta is not defined. We had an error. What did I do wrong? Oh, I forgot an equal sign here on line 109. So I have to say magenta is equal to that tuple value. And so let's run this now. All right, and so this perfect. Our game window pops open. We got color collide. It looks like it's the right dimensions. This is going to be our blank canvas, essentially where our multiplayer game will be played out. So I think this is a great place to stop here, and I will see you in that next video.